Good morning, everyone. This is Debbie Henderson from Debbie's Designs. Give me a second here while I get my iPad going. Can't seem to bring it up. Okay, there we go. So good morning, everyone. I know it's quite early for some of you guys, but I have appointments this afternoon, so I had to put this class on in the morning. So for those of you live, welcome, and for those of you watching later, this is my, I try to do this class every 2 weeks on my Stampin' Ink Designs group page. It's afternoon tea time and a card. So today it's in the morning. And for those of you that will be watching this later on YouTube, you can find me on Facebook by searching for Stampin' Ink Designs group. And you can request to join. So this morning I'm using the Floral frame stamp set, and I'm also using the foliage frame framelits dies. These dies are really pretty. They're really detailed. I was lucky that I was chosen to be a designer for one of our on-stage events, and this was what was sent to me to use. I wish I would have saved the cards to show you what I had done for the presentation, but I no longer have them. So let me go ahead and give you a list of what I'm using today. For inks, Calypso Coral and Gray Granite. I'm also going to be doing a little bit of coloring with the blends markers. So I've got the dark Petal Pink, the light Calypso Coral, and the light Granny Apple Green. Let me show you the card. Now, these are the 2 cards that I've done so far. This was episode 1 and episode 2. Today is episode 3. And this is the card I'm going to be showing you how to make today. I've got a little bit of embossing, some splattering, some coloring. We've got some gold foil, and then the Gingham Gala designer paper. So let me bring in all of the layers. The card base is Granny Apple Green, 11 by 4 1/4. The Gingham Gala, this is the Grapefruit Grove, and you can use either side. This measures 5.5 by 1.5. Thick Whisper White, and the reason I'm using thick is because I'm going to be using the aqua painter to do some coloring. And sometimes that does warp a little bit, so I opted to use the thick. If you don't, you can use the regular Whisper White, and you can also use the shimmery white. This is square, measuring 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. Now I've gone ahead and prepared some of this ahead of time. The ribbon is from the Calypso Coral ombre ribbon. So it's got the different, from light to dark. I've gone ahead and made a bow. These little leaves are cut with the gold foil. I've got 4 of them. And what's great about these dies, there's 2, so you can cut 2 at one time. And then I've gone ahead and cut out just the little flowers that you see here that are popped up with Stamping Dimensionals. I'm also using the Layering Leaves embossing folder, a spritzer with rubbing alcohol, and then the aqua painter and the blender pen. Oh, and I am also using the Stays On Black and the stamparatus tool. So the first step I'm going to do is actually score my card base. I'm going to score that at 5.5. And remember to use the scoring blade and not the cutting blade. As you can see, in order to remind me, I've written on mine with a permanent marker so I don't mess up. Now I'm using the spritzer with rubbing alcohol because the Layering Leaves is such a deep embossing. I actually, let me move this aside here. I actually spray my cardstock with rubbing alcohol. It dries fast, and by wetting it ahead of time, the embossing will be even greater. Now let me just add this to my embossing folder. And I'm going to run this through the Big Shot. Now this is one of the thicker dynamic embossing folders, so you do not need a clear plate on the top. And you can see how deeply etched that becomes, and the rubbing alcohol will dry pretty fast. So I'm going to set that aside. Now let's do some stamping. Now what I did with my stamparatus, I've gone and set it up ahead of time. I'm just using one clear plate, and I've got both stamps that I'm using all ready to go. And what I did is I used a scrap piece the same size as my thick Whisper White. The reason for that, I didn't want to waste this if I messed up on it, so I used a scrap piece. I inked my stamp where I wanted it. Next, I placed the sentiment face down, lined it up, grabbed it with my stamparatus tool, and it was perfect the first time. So now that my scrap is all set, I'm happy with the way that looks. Let's do the thick Whisper White layer. So I'm going to start out with the frame, this beautiful floral frame. And again, this is the Stays On Black. I'm going to ink that generously. Now, what I usually tell my customers, the Stays On is an ink that dries really quickly. So make sure you're ready to stamp before you start applying your ink, and you can see how pretty that is. If you're not happy with the way this looks, remember the great thing about the stamparatus, you can re-ink your stamp and stamp it a second and a third time if you want the image to be darker. Now I'm going to flip this over. We're going to do the sentiment, and same thing, I'm going to ink my stamp and quickly get it on there before it dries. And there's my sentiment. See how quick that was? So this would be great for mass producing some cards if you're doing swaps or working with a class. It would be a quick way to set up your class by using the stamparatus. Now let me just bring all of this stuff in. And I'll show you that my card base is almost dry already. We just have a few more spots left to dry. Now let's bring in the blends markers. I'm going to actually bring in something that's a little higher so you guys can see better. I'm hoping so you can see me color. Now let me get a scrap piece of paper on there. Maybe that'll cut down on the glare also. I'm going to use the Petal Pink light mark, or this is the dark marker, and color the flowers. Because this is Stays On, I opted to use Stays On because I'm actually going to be adding water. So I'm coloring very quickly so that it doesn't smear with the blends markers. You're supposed to use Memento ink, but if you do this really quick, it works. Okay, now I'm going to add the Calypso Coral. And I'm just pouncing. I don't want to blend because I don't want to blend the black ink. And you'll see that it's just as pretty as blending. Okay, there's those two flowers. So by pouncing over and over, you're not smearing or smudging the ink. Okay, so there's those flowers. Now let's work on the frame itself. And again, we have the same flowers. If you cut these and line them up, they're actually the same exact flowers. But when I glued them on, I moved them, I angled them a little bit so that you can see the ones on the frame and then the ones that I glued in place with Stamping Dimensionals. Okay, now the Calypso, and again, I'm just pouncing. And I hope you guys can see this okay with the elevated box. I don't dare mess with my camera. I can lower my stand, but I don't want to lose you guys. Okay, next is the granny apple. And I'm not using both colors. I'm just coloring it with the one color. The leaves are so small that I really felt that they didn't need to be blended with a darker color. And I tend to always use the thicker end of my blend markers. I hardly ever use the skinny tip. I don't know why. I just feel I have more control with the bigger tip. Okay, now let me move these aside. And I'm going to squeeze my gray granite ink pad. I'm going to use the ink from the lid. And this time I'm using a blender pen. I'm just grabbing a little bit of ink. And I just want to dirty this up a little bit. Sometimes I feel like there's too much white, so that's where I would add in the color to dirty it up. I'm not adding a lot. So when I grab the ink, I am hardly touching the ink. Just enough so I have enough to spread. Now let's see. And what I did is I started working on the inside of the image. And then I'm also going to add some to the outside. So can you guys see how I dirtied that up a little bit there? Just on the inside. It really makes everything pop. So now let's go ahead and add some around the leaves. Whoops. It's kind of weird to be coloring elevated like this, but it's working. As long as you guys can see, it works for me. I'm almost done. I just need to add a little bit around each flower. And remember too, when you're doing this, sometimes you might think it's too dark, but as it dries, it lightens up quite a bit. Okay, one more time right here, and I should be all done. Whoops, I went a little dark on that. I'll just keep spreading. But you'll see that this will lighten up as we go. Another thing to keep in mind, don't color too much in one area because your paper will start to make little pills. Okay, that's all I'm going to do there. So you see how that makes everything pop? It just softens everything up, and there's not so much white staring at you, and it just I think it looks a lot better that way. Okay, let me bring the card back in, and our card base is dry. So let me go ahead and fold that on the score line. And because there's a lot of embossing, I usually use my liquid glue to glue any layers because of the bumps. I just feel that it adheres a lot better. So let me glue that. I never thought I should have used the other side of the gingham to give you the different look to it. Now I'm going to bring in the snail. Oh, wait a minute. I have one more step I forgot. This is going to get glued on my scrap, but that's okay. So now I'm going to bring in the Calypso Coral. And again, I'm going to squeeze to get some color. This was like my favorite step, so I can't forget this one. Going to use the aqua painter. Add a drop of water on the lid. Make it really, really watery. And then I'm going to use my finger and just snap the aqua painter on my finger. And you'll see that I'll get some drops there. And you can add as much or as little as you want. Okay, let me see if I can bring that closer so you guys can see. See the little drops of color that added to the background? That's just a quick way to do some splattering, some ink splattering. Okay, now let's bring the card back in and finish adding some glue. And I am going to add a lot of snail only because of all the bumps. That's going to go right here. Next, stamping dimensionals on the flowers because I want these to pop. And I'm actually going to turn this a little sideways so you can see the flowers on the underneath also. The only thing we need to pay attention here is to not, I'm going to have to turn this one a little, to not overlap on the sentiment. Now we've got the little gold stems or branches. I'm going to cut the stems off a little bit because I'm actually going to add glue and sneak those under the flowers. I'm just going to go ahead and add the glue to all 4 of them. And let's see. My flowers are placed a little differently, so I'll add one here at the top. Slide that in. You see how nicely that gold looks against all the other colors? And then lastly, I'm going to bring in the glue dots and add the bow. And that's going to go right here, and let me fluff that up a little bit. And that's my card for today. Let me bring them both in. I didn't have time to do the inside this time like I normally do. So I hope you enjoyed my card, and just an announcement that I'll be live tomorrow on my business page for 3D Thursday. I'll be creating an Easter spring 3D project. Friday is my Friday folds, and then Monday is my paper pumpkin. So I have a lot of classes coming on. They all seem to have gathered together all this week. So I hope you guys plan on joining me. Thanks for visiting this morning. I know it was early for some of you guys. I'm glad you joined me. And I will see you guys soon. Have a good day, everyone.